There is a specific afternoon in Fiona Gallagher's life that I keep coming back to. She is at a party. She is young. There is cocaine on the coffee table, and she doesn't put it away properly, and her youngest brother Liam gets into it. He nearly dies. And then Fiona goes to prison. Now here is the thing most people take from that scene, that Fiona made a terrible mistake, that she failed the family she had spent her entire life protecting, that for one reckless afternoon she stopped being the responsible one, and look what happened. I think that reading is exactly right and completely wrong at the same time, because what actually happened in that kitchen is this. Fiona did something a young, careless adult might do at a party. She left something on a table. That is the act of someone who forgot, for one afternoon, that they were a parent, who was just being young, who had a right to be young. Except she didn't have that right, and nobody had ever given it to her. And Liam paid for the one afternoon she forgot that. She went to prison for being both the adult and the child in the same afternoon. And the cruelty sitting underneath that sentence, the thing the show spends 11 seasons building toward without ever quite naming, is that she should have had years of being just the child first. Years that were spent instead keeping the lights on, and the younger kids fed, and the truancy officers convinced that everything was fine. There is a term from developmental psychology that I think is the most accurate frame. The show never applies to Fiona directly. We'll get there. But once you have it, the Liam scene stops being a story about failure. It becomes a story about what was taken from her before she was old enough to know something was being taken. And once you see that, everything else about Fiona Gallagher starts making a different kind of sense. So let me give you the frame. The show never applies to Fiona directly, because I think it's the most accurate one available, and the fact that the show doesn't name it is part of what makes it so easy to miss. The term is parentification. It describes what happens when a child is placed, by circumstance, by the failure of the adults around them, by the simple arithmetic of who is present and who isn't, into a parental role before they have developed the psychological infrastructure to hold that role without cost. And I want to be precise about what that means, because it is not the same as being mature for your age. It is not the same as being responsible. It is a specific and documented form of developmental disruption, and what it disrupts is the thing it disrupts most completely in Fiona, the formation of an identity that exists separately from the needs of the people around you. Think about how young this started. Frank and Monica were not suddenly absent when Fiona was 15 or 16 and old enough to absorb the impact with some of herself already formed. They were absent or destructive or both from the time Fiona was old enough to notice the difference, which means the years that are supposed to build a person's sense of what they want, what they enjoy, who they are when nobody needs anything from them. Those years were spent keeping the lights on, negotiating with landlords, managing school systems, convincing truancy officers that everything was fine in a house where almost nothing was. Children who are parentified early enough and thoroughly enough don't simply become caretakers who also have selves underneath. They become people whose self is the caretaking, because the caretaking was what was required of them before they had anything else, and the self built itself around the requirement. Which means the trap isn't something Fiona fell into from the outside. It's something she built herself from the inside with the only materials she was given. And a trap you build yourself from the inside doesn't feel like a trap. It feels like who you are. The practical competence Fiona built in those years is real, and it is extraordinary. By the time she's 20, she can manage a household on almost nothing, negotiate with landlords, navigate bureaucratic systems most adults twice her age would find overwhelming, keep a family of 6 afloat on whatever irregular income comes in that week, watch her handle a crisis in the early seasons, an eviction notice, a child welfare visit, a medical bill the family cannot pay. And what you're watching is someone operating at a level of functional intelligence that is genuinely impressive. She reads situations fast, responds without panic, finds solutions where most people would find dead ends. These are real skills developed at real cost, and they are the thing that makes Fiona so easy to misread throughout the series. Because competence looks like confidence. Competence looks like someone who knows who they are and what they're doing. Competence looks from the outside like a self. But here is what competence is not. Competence is not a preference. It is not a desire. It is not a sense of what you would choose if you were free to choose. And those are the things, the preferences, the desires, the freely chosen directions that a self is actually made of. Fiona can tell you in 30 seconds how to handle any crisis the South Side throws at her. Ask her what she actually wants when there is no crisis, and the question lands in a way that's almost unfair. Not because she's incapable of wanting, because the wanting part barely got to develop. The crisis management part filled all available space. That gap between extraordinary competence and a missing interior life is not a character flaw. It is the direct consequence of parentification working exactly as it does. Now here is where the gap between competence and self shows up most clearly. Not in the crises Fiona handles. She handles those better than almost anyone. In the men she chooses. Because the pattern of who Fiona chooses across 11 seasons is one of the most precise pieces of character writing in the show, and it is almost never discussed as the unified argument it actually is. It gets read as bad luck or bad taste or a woman who keeps making the same mistake. I think it's none of those things. I think it's a nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do. Steve, also known as Jimmy, is the template, a man whose entire identity was a performance, who had a parallel life Fiona knew nothing about, who disappeared repeatedly and returned with explanations that never quite held, who was charming and present and then suddenly completely gone. And before you read that as Fiona failing to notice the obvious warning signs, consider what she grew up reading as normal. The people who love you leave without warning. The people who love you fail you on a schedule nobody announces in advance. The people who love you require you to do most of the work of loving them without reciprocation and call it a relationship. Frank and Monica did not teach Fiona what a functional relationship looks like. They taught her what love feels like from the inside. And from the inside, love felt like absence interrupted by warmth. Fiona's nervous system filed that away, not as trauma exactly, as the definition. Which means every man who was unavailable, unreliable, or unsuitable wasn't a mistake she kept making. It was a context she kept finding. Because unavailable was the only emotional register she had ever been given the tools to work inside. Every man Fiona chose who wasn't ready to meet her properly was just Frank in a better outfit. Not because she wanted to be hurt, because unavailable was the only emotional register she'd ever been taught to recognize as real. So what happens when something stable actually arrives? Because it does arrive, repeatedly. Across 11 seasons, Fiona gets close to things that are genuinely hers, a real career, a relationship that could actually hold, a pathway out that doesn't require her to keep running the same machine. And every time something like that gets close enough to be real, she does something that destroys it. A reckless choice, an impulsive decision, something that seems to contradict everything we know about how capable she is. The easy reading is self-sabotage, that this is a woman who can't tolerate her own success, who gets close to something good and finds a way to burn it down because some part of her doesn't believe she deserves it. I think that reading is close and wrong. Because watch what specifically happens when things go well for Fiona. The job is going well, the relationship has stabilized, the immediate crisis has been resolved, and the house is quiet. And Fiona starts moving differently, not happier, differently, like someone who has been handed a tool they don't recognize and cannot figure out where to put it. The stillness doesn't feel like peace. It feels like absence, like something is wrong that she can't name. That's not a woman who can't tolerate success. That's a woman whose entire psychological toolkit was built for one specific environment, chaos. And when that environment disappears, the toolkit has nothing to do. And a toolkit with nothing to do will eventually create the conditions it was built for. Not because Fiona wants to fail, not because she is broken in some simple, fixable way, because crisis is the only context she has ever fully known how to be in, and the saddest part of that is the one she never gets to say out loud. The chaos doesn't feel like suffering to Fiona. It feels like home. The Gallagher household does not fall apart when Fiona is gone. It wobbles. It struggles. There are moments where it looks like the whole thing might finally come apart without her holding it together. But it doesn't collapse. And once you see that, once the show lets you sit with what that actually means, it is one of the quietest and most devastating things Shameless ever does. Because what the household surviving reveals is not that Fiona was replaceable. It is that Fiona had built the Gallagher children into people who could survive without her, which was, in a very specific sense, the actual job. That is what a parent is supposed to do. Build people who can eventually function without you, who internalize enough of what you gave them that the giving eventually becomes unnecessary. Fiona did that. She did it completely, and she did it against extraordinary odds, and she did it without anyone ever having done it for her first. And then she had to live inside what that success actually means for someone whose entire sense of self is built around being needed. The role she had held since before she was old enough to hold it, the role that organized everything, that gave every day its structure and its urgency and its reason to get up. That role was finished, not taken from her, completed by her, because she was that good at it. For someone else, that might feel like graduation. For Fiona, it feels like the floor disappearing, because the floor was the only thing she ever learned to stand on. What is Fiona Gallagher if the Gallaghers don't need Fiona anymore? Frank got a new liver and started drinking again. Monica emptied the jar and bought a truck. Ian disappeared into every calling that promised to make him enormous. And Fiona held it together, for all of them, for as long as she could, long past the point where it was her job, and she did it so well and for so long that she forgot it was ever possible to put it down. And then she leaves, gets in a car, drives to Florida, and the show lets her go. I don't think the departure is wrong. I think it is, underneath the abruptness, underneath the imperfect send-off, the most important thing Fiona Gallagher ever does. Because for the first time in her life, she does something purely for herself, not because someone needs her to, not because a crisis has made it necessary. She leaves because she needs to go, because she has been in this building, in this role, since before she was a person, and she cannot find out who she is while she is still standing in the middle of it. She didn't stay out of strength. She stayed because she didn't know yet that leaving was an option. And then, finally, she did. Florida was not a failure. It was not abandonment. It was the first time in Fiona Gallagher's life that she did something that had no justification except that she needed to do it. It took her 30 years to get there, and the fact that it took that long is not a character flaw. It is the whole story.